We've been around since 2007. I was working with Nuclear Information Resource Service in DC, but we had a mitosis. And so we've got two viable organizations now. Beyond Nuclear's a little more weighted on the weapons and the power side. We've also got a really strong component on the nuclear waste. I mean, both groups work on the nuclear waste issue, but Nevada has successfully stopped the development of the Yucca Mountain, but it's just on. It's suspended. It's not really stopped. You can't really say that because the industry's lobbying really hard, and but it's also that the Western Shoshone are organizing now too on environmental justice issues, and the Biden administration has got a really strong. Well, they've got an environmental justice committee that has come out with basically saying that nuclear does not pass the environmental justice test. Now, Biden has not recognized that, unfortunately. He's still pushing to keep uneconomical, aging reactors going, and but as far as Congress goes, there's still a tug of war. Ron Biden with Oregon has a reconciliation bill that you're probably familiar with. It presently does not have nuclear in it, either new nukes or the this bailout to keep aging reactors going. But there are two bills, at least I think there are now three bills, moving through, two in the House, two in the Senate, one in the House, to bail out existing reactors that would otherwise close. Roughly half of the 93 plants that are currently operating are not economical. They're not able to really keep pace with the falling cost of renewable energy, and which is outpacing even natural gas now. It's cheap. Renewables are even cheaper than natural gas, and they deploy very quickly. So I mean, renewables are innovating all the time, but they're deployable. They're deplorable now, or deployable, I should say. And the big Democratic bill that we're concerned about is Senator Cardin, so it's Cardin, White House, Booker.
The Coleman.
Huh?
The one from Cole.
Manchin. And I think those are the.
So
and Carper. And Carper.
What happened to White House? Like what?
Who knows?
When did he fall out? Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, he's one of the biggest champions going.
Really, for that bill?
And others.
But why?
He's done some innovative, work on innovative technology as well. But this one that those guys are involved in, basically it's titled Zero Emissions Production, or Zero Emissions Nuclear Production Credit for 2021 Act. And there's nothing zero about it, but they've this is the only, they're looking to avoid the comparative cost carbon reductions with renewables, efficiency, and conservation. So the only way they can do that is under this misleading title of zero emissions. But it's not. These are moving forward. They're going to try to get these into the reconciliation bill. So that's where the fight is to try to keep them out. But we are lobbying. Cardin's my senator, and so we just had a meeting with him, and their energy guy, he said, I concede that it's not zero. So, but there's no other, just no, I mean, the thing they emit carbon-14 for one thing, and it's not, carbon-14 is not regulated out of nuclear power stations. I mean, it's not like a smokestack, but it's certainly not zero, and they're not really counting the uranium fuel chain. So it's false advertising, and that's basically what we told Cardin. And but I don't think there's any way that these guys can be touched with reason. So that makes it a problem.
And what's the mechanism they're going to use to keep the plants open? They're just going to give them money?
It's they're going to give them these production tax credits that will be charged. They're going to basically they're federalizing the state bailouts that are happening now. So they're just going to federalize that and charge consumers, ratepayers, but they'll be taxpayers instead now. So that is that's a big concern. Of course.
Excuse me, Paul. Could you explain for those who don't know what's carbon-14? I have no idea.
Carbon-14 is it's radioactive. It's a radioactive daughter of uranium-235, but there are it's both natural occurring, and but there is this bigger component that comes from fission, and but they are able, carbon-14 is typically used to date for carbon dating things.
Carbon-12 though, Paul?
No,
Carbon-14.
It's the radioactive
Carbon-12 is also a
well, that's regular. No, that's regular carbon.
for isotopic
It's
dating.
carbon-14 is the isotopic carbon. So so it's going to be a struggle. The Democratic Party is strongly supporting this. I think Wyden is strong though to keep this out. But
Where's Bernie at?
Bernie's no nukes. Markey's no nukes. There are some swing votes.
Shaheen, Hassan. How are they?
Maybe.
Probably conservative.
I think I don't think that we've got them.
Something to work
I don't.
on.
They could be pushed to swing, but right now I think they would vote along with Cardin and Booker and that clan. So that is sort of the projection. They're misrepresenting the fact that we have all of the above choice. It's not. The studies that we're seeing, and this includes Amory, Lovins, and Benjamin Sovacool, and there are a number of studies that say that we are at a crossroads right now, and that we can choose one path or the other, but we're not going to be able to resource both paths. So again, nuclear is in the position, they're jockeying to take from the real carbon abatement solution. And that's what the upcoming campaigns have got to focus on. That you will take from, if we go into nuclear, both in terms of keeping the old ones going and pumping money into so-called innovative new technology, that we will take resources and as you know, we will waste what precious little time we have left on projects that are not likely to succeed. You know, we had a 2006 nuclear renaissance, as it was framed, and there were applications for 30 plus units. The plus is that some of these 30 reactors, they were reference applications that the industry was going to say, if we can get this one reference reactor approved, we'll get these others to just draft in for their applications, and it'll be like a generic license approval. So we had one in Maryland that was a joint project of Constellation Energy out of Annapolis, partnering with Electricity de France for a what was the EPR, which in France is called the European Power Reactor, but because at that time we were down on French fries, it was entitled the Evolutionary Power Reactor. So that was one reactor that was to be sited in Maryland, right on the Chesapeake, but it had it was a reference application for 6 other units. And so that was their strategy. But Constellation recognized into the project that, you guessed it, there was no control over cost, and there was no way they were going to nail cost or time to completion. So they pulled their application, and Electricity de France looked for 2 years and could not find a U.S. partner, and so it was just an application that France was holding the bag for, and that was clearly against the Atomic Energy Act, which says you can't have foreign domination of U.S. nuclear power stations, so they had to pull the whole lot. But that same combination of what we're very familiar with is what of that 30, all but 2 units were withdrawn. The applications were withdrawn, suspended, canceled, or construction was commenced in South Carolina, and they got $9 billion into the project before they pulled the plug. And they got nailed with fraud through the FBI, and that. So they, people have gone to jail for pushing fraud on nuclear fraudulent projects.
Which utility?
This would have been Southern Nuclear, and I think, I'm not sure, but there are 2 projects still under construction in Georgia, Vogel 3 and 4. They too are billions over budget and years behind, and they're close, but there's no guarantee that they're going to get over the line. And then they're going to face rate shock. I mean, this is we can't get over repeating history with this. So, the economy of scale has once again failed. The whole idea of a renaissance is recognized as the same relapse. And so again, this industry, of any industry that I'm acquainted with, but this one I'm familiar with, is able to re-image itself again and again and again. And now it's being re-imaged with the idea that you can take a pressurized water reactor that was uneconomical to build on an economy of scale, and you can miniaturize it and build it on a small modular reactor scale with some idea that they're going to turn themselves into Henry Fords and push these things out on assembly lines. And so there are two ways they can do this. They can do it through getting a design certification approved by the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This is what they've done with an SMR, small modular reactor, or small mirage reactor. And they got a factory that's coming together in Portland, Oregon, and they've got power purchase contracts in Utah and through a municipal utility co-op in Utah, which is itself divided because its membership is unwilling, is afraid of the financial risk they're moving into. And Idaho Falls, Idaho, and they're going to site this SMR complex on the Idaho National Energy Laboratory territory. I mean, they've got this federal complex. It's 805 square miles, and so it's huge. It's where Idaho National Laboratory is, but it's sort of a safe zone against challenge. There's no way we can get standing. No way anybody can get standing unless it was the federal government itself. But the DOE is going to allow this to be sited on this federal land, and then they're going to sell it to these other utilities. And originally it was going to be 12 small modular reactors. It's now shrunk to 6, and Idaho Falls has shrunk its share from 10 megawatts down to 5 megawatts. So the deal is still, it's not really inked.
When is this supposed to start gearing up and going?
That's a good question. I mean, the issue of delay is none of these. The cost is uncertain. Which is why we're seeing the contracts are still shrinking, and the time to completion is reliant on getting this production facility completed. But they don't. Again, I don't see how they can guarantee that they have any more control. But from the get-go, when where economy, the whole idea of, this country started out with small modular reactors. Yankee Row was an 85 megawatt reactor, and and we had small modular reactors in other places. There was one in Panama powering the Panama Canal, but it wasn't, it wasn't economical to operate. But again, what the studies, at least our experts are saying is that the cost, where the whole idea of economy to scale has failed, you're not gonna win with building smaller reactors, and so the cost is going to be even more unpredictable, and even more than the one that's not economically working. While again, on the competitive market, the renewables are dramatically coming down, and then if you're coupling that with innovative programs and efficiency and conservation, which are even more carbon reduction effective, then they're going to have to change. They're going to have to tip the scale, the market.
So Paul, so if they get all these little things that they're building on that land or in that property, what are they doing like with transmission and distribution?
Yeah, they're gonna.
How are they doing that?
I don't know the transmission story on it, but they're going to have to. It's going to have to carry. That'll be another battle, but this could very well be a part of the
The new grid?
the infrastructure bill.
Oh,
So is that what we're talking about is on this infrastructure bill? When you say the reconciliation bill, is
Yes,
that the infrastructure bill?
yes, but it's the one that Biden has authored is it's bipartisan, but renewables got essentially double crossed in that deal. And hey,
So the one that's got the bipartisan bill, the little $1 trillion one, there's no renewables are out of it, but
the renewables have pretty much been knocked out
but
of
nukes
it,
are in it.
and nukes are in it, but not on the scale that they need, or that they. So the Cardin bill would for uneconomical existing reactors, I can say that it's $50 billion. I'm not sure on what it would be for the new reactors, but I know that this new scale project, the Department of Energy put $1.5 billion to get these co-ops involved. So they got subsidized to that's part of the power purchase agreement that they get $1.5 billion from the DOE to get plugged in. So
So does wind get anything, or offshore wind?
right now, that's going to be in the Wyden bill. So in the reconciliation bill, and nukes aren't in the reconciliation bill right now. So the idea is to keep nukes out of the of Wyden's bill. So Friends of the Earth is one of the key legislative actors in that, and at least in D.C. And so that is a good website to watch for the Wyden bill. I'll tell you, there's so many fights going on now. I mean, there's to pick one, which is the one that I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's the one that I've gotten down into the weeds on, is that the most viable bridge to the future for nuclear power right now is extreme license renewals. So
Like 100 years?
it starts out 90% of the operating reactors right now are in their initial 20-year license renewal period. So they were given a 40-year license, which Seabrook is in, and they just got their 20-year extension for 40 to 60, but then there's a subsequent license renewal for 60 to 80. So 90% of the industry right now is either approved or operating in that 40 to 60 year extension. And we've got 6 units that are approved for this 60 to 80. And we just went through a series of meetings in January and February where the public did get a seat at the table for industry and the regulator to talk about to take the 20-year interval, 40 to 60, 60, 80, and to turn it to 40. So for the bulk of the reactor population that's in this 40 to 60, they could start putting applications in for 60 to 100.
Based on zero evidence of,
It's
you know,
just
they'll
pulled out
last,
of the
right?
air. You know,
and they're all going to be embrittled,
it's
right?
pulled out of the air. Well, what there was a report that I found on 3 government websites. It was a report. We have a FOIA that's been running 3 years now. That's produced several thousand documents, including the contract that the NRC Department of Research said that as these license extensions become more extreme, you've got to calibrate these computer models that they're using to justify material reliability and safety for these projections that, you know, particularly for components that you're not going to be able to replace, or that they're inaccessible to inspection and maintenance, like the reactor pressure vessel. You're not going to get that thing out of there, and there's a lot of it that isn't even really serviceable in any way. And so
Have they figured out what to do with the waste yet?
no,
That
well,
too.
you know, in fact, that component is going to be a big part of the waste, but they don't have a long-term management plan, and what they're working on is what they call consolidated interim storage, which is to take land from red and brown communities and turn them into national sacrifice areas, and say that this is where it's going to be until we do come up with a long-term
Which they've been saying from the very beginning.
Again, it's, you know, the Yucca Mountain's not dead. It just changes with who becomes president. But even Trump didn't revive it. But so this federal lab report, which came out in December of 2017, that just, you know, we just happened to discover it, and it was also on the DOE's website, and it was also published on the International Atomic Energy website, International Atomic Energy Agency's website, to say that in order to benchmark your computer models that you're using for your design review, you know, your licensing review process, you've got to do, we call it autopsies. They call it strategic harvesting and laboratory analysis. But it's like doing an autopsy. and you take a decommissioning unit like Maine Yankee. What did they do with Maine Yankee? What did they do with Roe? What are they doing with Vermont Yankee? They're going to bury them whole. They're not taking archival samples from these, from strategic places on the pressure vessel that have had the highest exposures to radiation and the synergistic effect of vibration and extreme temperature changes.
They're not going to learn anything.
You're not going to learn anything because, ignorance is bliss when you're talking about license renewal. And the way they can control the guarantee, they use this word guarantee really freely in the license renewal process, and that is by hiding the ball, and hiding the ball that they're, again, this contract said, NRC Research Department told the Pacific Northwest National Lab, identify critical knowledge gaps that are needed to provide reasonable assurance, which is a legal standard in the license renewal process, on where these knowledge gaps are, and then make recommendations on what we can do to get to that legal standard of reasonable assurance. So the lab did that work from from November 2015, and they published in December 2017. We saw the report, and I had the opportunity to go into a meeting with NRC Division of Materials for License Renewal and raise this report and the questions, and that they said, you've got to require, that's a quote, strategic harvesting to address inaccessible areas, components that are too big to replace, cable, a typical nuclear power station will have 600, 700 miles of safety-related electrical cable in it, but it's buried. You don't get at that, other than opportunistic ventures, you don't strategically get at it until the opportunity of decommissioning. So they were saying, at decommissioning, we want you to go in where you cannot in an operable reactor, get this material and run it through an analysis in national labs, and then we have the observable and measurable science and archival material for continued study to give to both benchmark these computer models, which frankly are just, those are constructs. They're not necessarily based in the real world, was the word that PNNL used. You need the real world. And so when I raised that question in this NRC meeting, you could see these jaws drop. And they, within 2 days, they had that report. I don't know what they thought. Did they not know that it was public? It had been public for 9 months. Mm-hmm. But it was pulled within 2 days from 3 websites. Oh. And so they said that it was a draft. Now, I had seen the drafts. There were a host of drafts, and they were marked as drafts because it was the PNNL report XXXX. But this one had the number, and this one was was then published in the Office of Scientific and Technical Information on the Department of Energy's website, and it was also put out on the internet, the Nuclear Information system of the IAEA. So were they all bamboozled? Were they all? But it had a contract number. I mean, but again, these are questions that we've not settled yet. They may in fact be settled legally. But so they're proceeding now on bogus license renewal standards. But the case with Seabrook is a really good case of another, you're zeroing in on the fact that NextEra was moving on the relicensing of Seabrook for a 20-year, this 40 to 60-year extension on the age management program for Seabrook's concrete and the license renewal review process to give the safety review and the material reliability of Seabrook's concrete for irreplaceable components like the containment structure and the spent fuel pool and electrical cable vaults running through the marsh that has lost at least 30% of its compression strength through this alkali-silic reaction because of the concrete pours were not quality. And so NextEra contracted the work to do that, to bona fide its age management program projections for the license renewal on virgin pores in Texas from a different aggregate. And again, they were doing construct studies that are not related to the real world. And C10 challenged it, and they have, while they weren't able to convince the licensing board that it failed the initial criteria for the review, they did raise the bar for analyzing the, doing more real-world samples off of the site.
Wait, C10 achieved that?
That was due to, they had the world's best concrete expert who volunteered his time. He thought it was so egregious that he said, "Look, I'll do your legal work for free, just so we can bust him on this."
Wait, what's the date on that? How recent is that?
It's last year.
It was actually the contention was filed. This was the complication. The contention was filed after the filing period. So, they filed in 2010, and so legally you had 60 days. You had a 60-day window to get your contentions in. C10 didn't really. Again, the utility had been hiding the ball.
Well, ASR wasn't even public. It was 2011
they knew
before
about
anybody.
It.
They knew about
they
it.
Knew about
they didn't
it,
tell us.
But they were hiding the ball, and it's just they're doing this with every material in these plants. Anything that has to go through that scrutiny of age management study for their review for these increasingly extreme extensions, they're hiding the ball. And even to scrub, which are their words, when the FOIA revealed that when they saw that, when the NRC saw what was published through PNNL and its contract with the NRC Office of Research, NRR, the Nuclear Reactor Regulation Division, has another division called the Materials Division of License Renewal. So this is the license renewal component This is the material division of NRC's licensing division. When they caught word of what was in the public world, they freaked out. And they said, this has got to be scrubbed. And so they took out some 60 references of critical technical knowledge gaps related to safety, where the lab had said we need to require the strategic autopsies to answer the unanswered questions. They said that has to be scrubbed out, and they did. And that's what's on the NRC's website, but it's not on any of the other websites. It's not. They didn't republish on PNNL or the DOE but so the scrubbed report is only in NRC's name. But that that is right now the only relicensing is the only viable bridge to the future. And they're guarding it at all costs. So
when an accident happens, they'll be revealed in some way, or probably still get away with it.
That's up to you.
Well,
that's
depends.
look, we had Fukushima. We had the 3 reactors that were operating at the time of the earthquake and the tsunami. They were at full. 3 of the 6 units that were operating, 100% power. All 3 of them melted down. That had been predicted in 1972. It had been affirmed in 1986 that if the Mark I has a severe accident, Heinrich, I can't remember his name, but the 73 guy, or no, it was 72. He said a high likelihood that it will fail. When it was reevaluated in '86 by Harold Denton came out and said 90% chance. When Fukushima demonstrated it was 100%. So if these reactors that were at power, they lost their containments. And so we've got 19 left in the United States, and we know what's going to happen.
And there was almost no changes required. I know the flooding was a joke.
What they did on an order was, the staff had recommended, post Fukushima, by 2012, they had said that these reactors, the Mark I's, they were and they included the Mark II's this time, as also likely to fail. They said that we should evaluate they gave them the approval to continue operating, but they said that they needed to have hardened containment vents with an external filter system. So they basically said, we want you to put engineered external filters in their own separate containment on site so that you can vent the pressure, the temperature, the explosive gas, and the radiation out of the bogus containment into a filtered, fortified containment, and then vent it to the atmosphere minus the radioactivity.
Right. Assuming the filters work.
Well, they said that there was they had a high probability that they could get 90% of it.
Craps out, it's not going to kill 1 million people, whereas we find out about the nuke failing when it melts down, right?
Yeah. So as far as internationally, though, you know, on the waste issue, they are about to open up the first deep geological repository in granite in Finland. So there will be an operating repository in a couple of years, but it's going to be granite.
So New Hampshire looks like a great place.
Yeah.
They're gonna.
Exactly.
And it's relatively small, right? It only handles like 4 plants or something.
Is it just
Yeah.
for the domestic market, or is it going to take waste international?
That's a good question. I
don't
think
think-
right now the plan is only for. I mean, they're still looking to increase their nuclear generating capacity in Finland. Sweden is close behind. Germany is stalled, and
Stalled,
that's
aren't they
about
closing
it.
them down?
Huh?
Stalled, but aren't they closing them down?
In England,
Germany.
Germany is closing. They're going to be ahead of schedule, I think. I think that they're going to have all their reactors closed by by next year.
But what you're saying is that Germany is stalled in terms of its
Its high-level radioactive waste management program. But you know, they do have they can make the claim that we've taken the first and the most responsible step of capping the amount of unmanaged waste. So politically, they've at least addressed the first step, not expanding it, either in renewals or expansion.
But we're saying, look, they don't know where to put it. They don't have a place to put all the waste in this country. Oh, not as far as they're concerned.
Yeah,
And
right.
as soon
Yeah,
as they cut the
they
ribbon,
will argue that. Yes, you'll hear that
and
argument.
they
I
dump the
can't
shit,
wait
it will
another
be-
minute to
Look,
say hello to you. And I'm
somebody's
sorry
done
I'm
it.
getting so... I have a mask, but
There is one other.
I'll be in trouble if I do anything.
absolutely.
There's one other new
Nice to see you,
argument
Donna.
that's come in
Yeah.
that potentially affects the Seabrook site. There's a new startup called
Newbrook?
yeah. I mean, it's almost there. It's
We still own that, don't we?
what is it's anyways what it is they're going to take the boring technology for fracking
Oh, no.
and for horizontal drilling, and they're going to make a repository deep enough under existing sites that they'll just put the fuel deeper into the ground.
Down there into the aquifer.
Really?
Deep isolation.
Yeah.
It's called
Holy-
deep isolation, and they're going to turn each site
into a...
Oh,
in using hydrogeological drilling.
Great.
Do they own all that land underneath their site?
Yeah.
How far
Really?
down?
And there's the
They're saying that they can go a mile and into
Legally or technically?
scientifically viable for isolation.
they can say it.
They can say it.
Yeah.
How can we fight to protect the inner part of the earth? Like
Right.
how can we say if you have drilling rights, it goes only so far?
Right.
Like, let's start working on that.
But the other
Right.
thing is, I mean, but honestly, we're in a bind ourselves because we also have to be on the side of saying there's got to be something to do with this stuff that's been created and to keep it out of interacting with the rest of the natural world.
That's
So we've
right.
still got to be advocating for some safe method
Yeah.
of disposal of this stuff.
Right.
But fracking hasn't damaged any other things.
I'm not saying that fracking is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
answer here. I'm just saying that it's from our perspective, we can't say it's hard for us to stand on an argument that says don't build nukes because we don't know what to do with the waste, while we also argue against doing anything with the waste, saying you can't do anything with the waste.
Right.
I mean, because at this point, we're screwed.
Well,
but
again,
Yeah.
the first step is to cap the level of unmanaged
Not making more.
Right.
It's not even really the volume. The industry has a typical argument, they're saying we could take all the nuclear waste in the United States
Put 'em in a football.
and put it on a football field.
Yeah, they say that.
They don't tell you that everybody in the stadium would be dead. But, it just gives you this impression, this false impression that
It's not a lot of stuff.
that it's volume that you got to be concerned about, which is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's really about the radioactivity, and that's got to be isolated. And you don't isolate that putting it on top of a football field has nothing to do with isolation.
That would be shopping malls and stuff.
Yeah.
Something to do with recycle those malls.
Shopping malls are not being used.
So they're able to they're able to re-image, and as long as they've got the political capital behind them, we're facing this incredible stall on how we can really impact climate crisis with the greatest carbon reduction at the least cost, quickest. That's how we're going to deal with climate crisis, or we will fail.
Can I use that as an opportunity to ask Doug to give us a little offshore wind?
Yes.
Sure, and I'm not
Yes.
as
Uplift
up on
us.
it as I was a few years ago, but there's been a huge amount of developments. If your information is even 6 months old, it's old. I mean, it's amazing how quickly things have been moving along. And really, the reason I got into it is Paul and others started arguing that, hey, they're the competition, and it's viable. We know how to do this. We know how to build a wind turbine that can generate megawatts. And really the big change in the last 10 years since we first started arguing is that they've doubled, tripled, quadrupled the capacity of each turbine, and they're just much more efficient. And as you go further offshore, you get much more power. And so a lot of the arguments previously against wind power don't apply that well to offshore. And so even conservative Republicans like our governor, Sununu, are kind of jumping on the bandwagon. And because
So where's he at right now?
Well, it's a little screwy. I mean, I'm sure Renny knows better than me. He did follow our lead or our suggestion that he request a task force, which is the first step. I mean, it's the very first step in the federal process. This would be for the Gulf of Maine. They'd already had task forces for south of Cape Cod and other places in the country. But it was a big deal to get a Gulf of Maine task force. I think even the state of Maine, state of Massachusetts weren't really looking at it yet because they had other things in the works. But anyway, he, I think saw the business opportunity. I don't think he did it because, it seemed like a good idea for the environment. But he did get a lot of pressure. I mean, we did do a huge grassroots effort, including getting his hometown of Newfields, New Hampshire, to vote overwhelmingly at their town meeting, despite his brother being on the select board, to support this. So
What year was that?
that was 3 years ago now, or 4, 2016. Yeah, it's been a while. So he did make that move. It was actually his first step, the first thing I think he did, like January 2nd of his second term. So that was great to see. The problem is, of course, once it took a year to get the actual task force up and running, and then COVID happened, right? So they haven't had a meeting since. So that's kind of tough. But in the meantime, there's been a huge effort to develop the development angle to say, hey folks, we can make a lot of money on this. Even if we never build a wind farm off the, in the Gulf of Maine, we could be supplying to other wind farms. And so a lot of different business interests and people that promote business have gotten involved. And so you have the, I don't remember the name now, but the Economic Development Office for the state is now really heavily into it, and they've hired somebody out of the environmental community basically to head up that effort, right?
I mean, it's crazy, like Eversource, which is the legacy company, a public service company in New Hampshire, going back to the Install Empire, but they are like gangbusters on offshore wind.
Right.
They are just, going to do that. I think some people see that there's a lot of money to be made, some money to be made for it. I think that there is a, substantial interest in the business community to help jumpstart this new industry and to get it going quick. I mean, a lot of technology is being that Eversource is using is coming from, the Scandinavian countries where they have a head start on it. But it's pretty, on the one hand, exciting. But COVID did shut stuff down.
But as you've probably heard from south of the Cape, there have been some ups and downs there, but I think they're getting back on track now. I mean, it's hard to imagine these are such huge operations, and we don't have the technology here to install the turbines. They have to borrow the ships and all kinds of things from Europe. So you can imagine the scheduling complications. But, they're looking to build, I don't know the latest figure, but something like 12,000 megawatts. We're talking 10 Seabrooks just off of Martha's Vineyard, just off the Cape, and then more further down the coast. And when Biden came out and said we're going to do 30,000 megawatts, well, there's already 29,000 megawatts in the queue, already planned, and some of them are already permitted and given the green light.
And that same vertebrae, they're the vertebrae of an eastern seaboard backbone of offshore wind. They're popping up. And the reason the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board kicked us out of the Seabrook license renewal proceeding was they said that we could not guarantee that it would happen by 2030.
And it may not even the first steps by. And it's true, things did get slowed down. It was mostly for political reasons. Remember, the governor of Maine was kind of a whack job, and he may be back.
You're being polite.
Yeah, right. But it's an interesting phenomenon that even people like Sununu are kind of getting a clue. But again, it's coming down to business, and the latest interesting twist on this, it's not really about offshore wind, but about the overall grid. In New England, you've probably heard about this power line through Maine, which has its own issues, and obviously a lot of people fighting that. And it's getting power from.
That's transmission conflicts.
There's that, but what's really interesting, or I didn't realize this myself, not following things in Maine much. And it is up for a referendum, so folks in Maine will have a chance.
One question, not three.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Explain that one.
But what I found most fascinating from our point of view is that the funding for the anti-power line, and this is Quebec Hydro, for better or worse, semi-renewable, but not really.
And an environmental justice issue.
Yeah, and all that. But the folks that are most concerned about it are the people running the existing plants, whether it's fossil fuels or nuclear. And one of the biggest outfits, of course, is NextEra, right, that owns Seabrook. They own several gas plants. They also own wind farms elsewhere, but they don't stand to make any money from this power line coming from Canada. So they are the #1 funder of the folks promoting this referendum and trying to kill it. I mean, go figure, but that's the weird, strange bedfellows we've got. So if you're anti-nuclear, you need to be pro-power line. I mean, it's sad, but... and remember, this is Plan B or Plan C. The original plan was to run a power line through New Hampshire, right?
Right down Main Street of Plymouth.
Yeah, I mean, that was a horrible idea, right?
They also backed that.
But what about the native communities that are being disrupted?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
One of my concerns is people seem to think electric cars are an answer, but where does the electricity come from to run the electric cars?
Well, offshore wind. I mean, we didn't really talk about how big offshore wind is. I mean, 30,000 megawatts is really just a small
the study that blew our mind in 2010 was from the University of Maine at Orono. That said there were 450 Seabrooks in the Gulf of Maine.
Yeah, that got my attention. That's a good start. You know, we know there aren't that many new plants in the planet.
I mean, again, believe me, we don't swallow that hook whole.
Right.
Because, you know, we need to know every major federal action is going to have to go through an environmental review. Right. One of those environmental reviews is if you put 450 Seabrooks in the Gulf of Maine in offshore wind, that's going to have a lot there's on fishing, on
I mean, that's not going to happen.
Whales. I mean, there's there's vibration, sonic. You know, I mean, we've got everything's got to go through a filter.
We might have icebergs floating down at
But that's why efficiency. You know, we can't be unfettered in generation. You know, it has to be. We have to also incorporate an equation, a formula that brings in
the sun's starting to get
conservation and efficiency.
Is Indian Point closed now?
Yes, all three. We've actually got two good. David Lockbaum, formerly with the Union of Concerned Scientists, is now the science advisor to the state of New York on their decommissioning oversight board. So Dave is supportive of the whole harvesting idea, you know, that you would use Indian Point to turn it into a science lab on age management for these wildly extravagant license extensions. And so, I mean, so there are some good checkpoints that are
How long will he have a position, do you think?
Until, I don't know how long he's tenured for, but it would be
pretty persistent branch.
I think that they've got several years, but to come up with a plan.
Kind of puzzling.
The other thing about the Gulf of Maine, though, is that I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but it's not a static place, and it's changing so rapidly now that it may very well be that whatever change those 450 windmills make is almost negligible. I'm not saying it is, but compared to the changes that are taking place without them.
Oh yeah.
So if you don't deal with one, then the other is irrelevant. I mean, if they're tied that way, I'm not suggesting that.
And they are doing all the environmental reviews. I mean, that's one thing that slowed down the efforts south of the Cape was an extended environmental review that was requested by the fishing industry, because they're the real environmentalists, according to them, right? You know, it's just unfortunate that different forces have been pushing things one way or the other, But, you know, they are doing, I mean, environmental reviews are happening. It's not like they're going to shove it down anybody's throat, but, you know, there's always winners and losers, unfortunately. But all in all, compared to, you know, nuke waste, fossil fuels, toxic whatever, you know, wind power is so much cleaner, and even the environmental impacts that we know about appear to be less so with floating systems, which is what we would need in the Gulf of Maine.
Right.
And we're only talking about a few % of the total water area of the ocean. No, I'm just saying we don't want people to think there's going to be wall-to-wall wind turbines. Yeah.
And what does Greta Thunberg say about this? Does she say anything?
I expect she's
I mean, she came by
pretty
wind.
supportive. Yeah, she used wind power to, and
We've
she's
not
from.
heard her swallow the nukes.
I mean, the good thing is young people really get this. I mean, the work that I was talking about, I didn't even lift a finger on the Newfields and some of these other towns, there are just a whole lot of young people and older folks that got involved. Some we didn't even plan on, and way over on the other side of the state, up this way maybe, that promoted these petitions and referenda. So that's encouraging to see young people really get it. Now they don't necessarily get it about nukes, and in a lot of cases I have to remind them that they're
well, that's what,
but
right now, we are putting the heat on Sunrise. But unfortunately, they need the heat because they haven't put it out publicly yet, but privately they have said that they're ready to negotiate on existing plans.
Do you want to move out of the sun?
No, I'm fine.
Do others, it looks like others are...
We're kind of migrating into the shade here.
I like the Williamses. Look how they migrated. That's cool.
that's my other innovation that hasn't really caught on. But I have to say that Economic Development Commission, actually, that was formed, one of their charges is to look at the shipyard as a site. And the Navy has actually been, they've been somewhat open about at least saying, yeah, we might be able to provide some facilities. I mean, I want to see it obviously 100% converted, but even if we got a little piece of it, and they have a program actually for private leasing, which they've used.
That would be a good swords into plowshares.
Exactly, yeah. And it's the ideal location. I mean, there's no bridges to get in the way, that's why the shipyard's there, right?
For starters, you've got all this unused industrial property.
Yeah. Yeah, and with floating systems, having dry docks is really awesome because you can build it in the dry dock and then float it where you want it. So it would be great.
The senators in New Hampshire get really concerned about the possibility of it being shut down and all the job losses. So this
I have to say the most pushback I've gotten from it is from our Democratic congresspeople and senators. So.
Pushback against it?
Even mentioning the shipyard. We don't talk about the shipyard. The only solution is to...
anything other than building submarines there, the shipyard being closed, and that's almost as bad as losing the first in the nation primary.
Yeah.
Right up there, yeah.
Exactly.
Speaking of the whole issue of jobs and stuff, there's a group now, well actually it's been around for a while, Connecticut Roundtable on Jobs and the Environment. And Jeremy Brecker is in it. Jeremy, of course, is the people's historian who's been part of progressive efforts for a long, long time in the Naugatuck Valley. And they passed a bill this year that said that as any kind of dirty energy production goes, gets put under, put down, that workers would receive the prevailing wage on any of the new jobs that they're getting. And prevailing wage is big for union folks. But also that there'd be a lot of money poured into community reinvestment in the poorer communities that would all be focused on clean energy. Now, whether or not, what kind of impact that has, I mean, it's legislation, so that's good. But the most important thing is that the environmentalists and labor people have been working together now for a number of years on this approach, all with the idea that you build the ties we were trying to build originally in the Clamshell Alliance. You build them, and the Machinists Union and some of the building trades are very much a part of the effort, and that's a really, I mean, this is really kind of groundwork, slow plowing of the fields, but it's been consistent, and they're coming out with legislation that would tackle the problems of getting rid of coal, gas fire, and I think nukes, We only have 1 nuke left out of the 4 that we had. One too many. But anyway, it's a good effort, and I'm not sure if it's being adopted anywhere else. That kind of labor coalition, labor environmental.
There has been some effort here, and again, on offshore wind, labor is seeing the opportunities. So it's tentative for sure, but you know, for New Hampshire, that's a pretty good deal to even be talking to each other. So.
Yeah, that's good.
We don't want someone like Elon Musk to get into it. Right?
No.
Taking some weird profit somehow, even though it looks good, I don't know.
Elon just came out for nukes.
Oh yeah.
Oh, great.
And of course, Bill Gates has been funding the mini nukes for.
He didn't give any detail. He just said that it's doable.
Right.
So
But
Paul, in terms of like going back to the issue of waste, is that what you think is going to happen in terms of Seabrook? That they're going to propose some sort of deep underground?
It's gaining steam. You know, it's not. What would be preferred, and I'm sure they will. I'm sure their lobbyists currently argue is that it'll go to interim storage, which means they will take land. They will site a consolidated storage facility.
So by fiat, they would do that.
There was one proposed around here in Tamworth.
Right.
That year that there were 3 proposed waste sites in New Hampshire. One was up here because there's so much woods and so few people.
But the 2 sites that are
Yes.
there was the legislation that's moving right now federally is to take land in New Mexico and Texas, and the 2 sites are miles apart, but
Are you saying just miles?
10-12 miles apart.
Oh.
They're just on the other side. They're
Minority homes.
they're all minority communities.
Where's Deb Haaland on this?
That's a good question. I mean, she is a supporter of environmental justice, so it's hard to take a turn. But she's federal lands, right? So these aren't being cited. The question hasn't come up to her in her jurisdiction because it's private, or it's. I don't think I don't think any of it's federal lands.
So it's transporting radioactive waste across the country.
Yeah. Right.
Putting it in New Mexico for a
And
little while,
Texas.
some while, and then put it underground.
Someday.
Through fracking.
Well, those are the only legislation is consolidated interim storage. There, the borehole idea is they're lobbying. They're still lobbying for it.
Yeah. But so what you're saying then, it sounds like they're settling in on a national waste site. It's not Yucca Mountain.
And it's not permanent.
It's not meant to be permanent.
It's not meant to, but that's,
Yeah.
the argument is where it is where it's going to be.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, why,
Risk
again, Arnie, I completely understand the argument that, but short of new alchemy, there isn't one. I mean, we could get behind new alchemy, and it would be as viable as saying that there are other options, but turning waste into lead, which is a natural process, it will take some time for it to actually happen. Hundreds of thousands and millions of years. It will eventually turn to lead. But that's reverse alchemy from, you know.
Well, New Alchemy was a town in upstate New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at least in the issue of Seabrook, it can stay where it is, because we all know sea level's rising, and we aren't doing much at all to stop that.
Well, you know, what is being argued, and even we're suggesting this, is because of, particularly for coastal plants, unfortunately they're all located near water, on water, is that the independent spent fuel storage installations, and this just happened at Pilgrim, they have agreed to move the independent spent fuel storage on site to higher ground, off site.
Yeah.
So they have zoned moving the dry casks to higher ground. The qualifier is the shortest transportation distance.
So they put it on the roof in our state, I think. Put it on the roof of the
Garbage cans.
In a dumpster.
Might as well.
I'll bet.
The problem is there isn't a lot of high ground around Seabrook, right? I mean, you got to go a ways, and the roads suck because we aren't fixing them. I mean, it's a real problem. They tore up the railroad tracks, right? They used to run by the plants, so they ain't going on rail. You know.
Oh, from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, right?
Yeah, well, that rail line still exists, but
yeah,
you can't get there from Seabrook. Yeah. It's a rails to trails. I mean, it's great for bikers.
What a mix!
Yeah, you know, you
can
hike
go
it.
Trails to rails. So.
Yeah, right. So I don't know. It's a mess either way, but clearly you don't want seawater pouring into your waste site.
Right.
I guess I could build a dike.
You know, nobody has any confidence really about how quick the sea rise will happen.
Looks like it's going to happen a lot faster than that.
Yeah.
My sister raised some sheep in Alberta, but they only had rights to like the surface of the land where they grazed the sheep.
Right.
You know, if an oil company wanted to come in and set up an oil pump drilling thing, they could do it. And my sister and husband couldn't say anything. You know, all the rights to minerals below the ground belonged to somebody else.
Right.
And the water.
Yeah, anything below ground was not theirs.
Right.
I've always been an advocate for nuclear suppositories.
Yes.
And you know, there are qualifying factors who gets the suppository.
Yeah. Oh, Chris Sununu needs.
Whatever else is around
them on top of that.
Talking about nuclear power.
Really? Yeah, when they were looking in New Hampshire in '85 and '86, launching it on the shuttles was popular until Challenger.
Yeah, right.
They were, you know, the DOE came in fall of '85, and their agenda included deep geological burial, the Antarctic ice shield, and shuttling it into space. All of which, you know, have gone by the way of absurd.
Although we are sending a little plutonium every once in a while
too.
into space. Yeah.
Paul or anybody, do you know of any serious movement toward having global voting or some way, because anything that is done is a global issue now, and so is there any serious consideration of some way to have this be a global issue that people from everywhere weigh in on?
It is. Yeah. It's regional now. The European Union is saying nuclear economics are not. You know, they're arguing it.
Yeah.
It's an issue in debate over. I think it's called taxonomy, but there is strong pull to say that it's no longer economically viable.
After all the years that they
Yeah.
are supporting it for more than
Yeah.
in Europe, but nothing that beyond the
No-
EU,
there's no
but in
democratic
other
process
regions, yeah, nothing
that I'm
cross
aware
region,
of.
yeah.
But it's, you know, it's basically, it's economics that are, you know, that's where the votes are right now. And
Does NEARS get invited to anything that's the equivalent of you over there? Or do you invite them here? Europeans and do you have?
we are, NEARS has been going to the COP hearings.
COP is what?
We haven't, we haven't been participating in those, but
What is COP?
what's the acronym? It's basically what?
Yeah, I don't remember the acronym either, but it's like
It's you know, it's energy policy.
Oh, okay.
it's directed at climate.
But
Actually.
principally
A
climate.
subset of climate, just kind of a subset of the climate talks.
Yeah, I mean it is the World Climate Talks,
Yeah.
such as they are, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the ones we've heard about, Copenhagen, Rio, Poland, etc. Yeah.
You know, it's really distressing to hear that the Sunrise Movement is, you know, possibly going to be taken in by the propaganda.
As AOC.
Oh,
really?
She's, you know, changed her tune. But it's not, you know, she's playing politics with it. You know, we don't have time for that, particularly given that it's, you know, it's now moving legislatively.
Well,
So she needs to be more vocal. And she had partnered with Markey for the Green New Deal, but the Green New Deal is getting blurred by her not coming out to say what the details are on nuclear energy.
Well, I trust people in New York to be able to pressure AOC better than anybody I know to pressure the Sunrise Movement. There's a little chapter or something in Connecticut which is just, I don't think it's anywhere, but is there any equivalent of sort of youth-generated climate change, climate action?
350.org.
Yeah.
They're quiet.
No, quiet, but they're quiet.
They're quiet.
Yeah.
Okay. But they're anti-nuclear. Quiet.
I mean, you know, if
Can't
you ask
say
Bill
that.
McKibben, the founder or co-founder, he'd say yeah, but
He came out against Vermont Yankee.
Yeah. But they're generally they're quiet. I mean, I'm on the steering committee for the state 350.org, so I guess I'm as good as you get to being there. And like I said, I've talked with the people involved on the staff, and you know, they weren't around when 3 Mile Island happened. They weren't even around when Chernobyl happened. Fortunately, they had the HBO version of Chernobyl, so some of them are getting a clue of what's been going on. But so many of them, it's just out of sight, out of mind. I mean, they just didn't hear
But, you know,
about.
They should have. All these climate action groups should have been surprised by the bipartisan Biden bill. You know, that's a plan.
Yeah.
That has jilted renewables.
Yeah. Well, aren't they all counting on the reconciliation,
The reconciliation
right? I mean,
bill,
you know,
right.
Bernie and
But,
company.
you know, it's a question of where you stand your ground.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And some of these things are, you know, not, it's not legitimate to give ground.
Yeah.
It's also at the point now where it's such a stupid insider's game. You know, whatever gets stuck in the legislative process is what we're going to deal with. You can't get, you know, you're not going to unravel the reconciliation bill. You're not going to unravel the infrastructure bill. You
because of nukes. It's just too big.
Right. And that's, I think,
And that's what's frustrating, because you don't,
yeah.
like, who even internally is making the decisions about what gets stuffed and where and how it happens.
Yeah.
And why is it after a bill is accepted and passed, people say, oh, it has this in it and that in it, as if they didn't ever read it?
And a lot of times you don't read it. It's a long bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you trust people that read it. No, I mean, you do trust people to read it that know what's in it. I mean, it's just the nature of...
there will be a lobbyist that will give them
Right.
talking points that only include
What they want.
what they want to hear.
Well, you have like lots of different versions, language floating around. You don't even know to what somebody at some point says, puts out a piece of paper and says, this is what we're voting on. They vote on that and all these other, and whatever that is. That's it, and you rely upon people to...
It's like the Patriot Act.
Right.
Oh, you know, it's all the details and stuff.
I want to mention it's about 4:15 now, I think. We've been sitting here for a while and we can keep going. But I want to make sure that everybody gets to meet Octavia.
Hey, Octavia.
And then we're going to have a meet and greet with Octavia at 5 out here on the lawn somewhere.
Cool.
Put her in the middle of the circle.
That'll be... well, she'll be in the middle of the circle then, so we don't need to put her in the middle
But
of this circle.
Octavia is the incoming director of World Fellowship Center.
Yes, of course.
So,
Andy and Andy are retiring.
Thank you all for being
and the meet
here.
and greet will probably... Will that include refreshments?
I did bring a few bottles over.
All right. So liquid refreshments, I'm assuming that's what's in the bottles, it's some type of a liquid item.
Yes. It's
So-
easier to keep the COVID safety stuff with the liquid than
The liquid, all right.
the food.
Good.
Food items.
So obviously people can continue hanging